Hello everyone. In today's virtual class, we're going to cap off our series of lectures on how to use the human figure in interior design compositions. First, we're going to review the techniques that we've discussed in class on how to draw the human figure. Then I'm going to talk about how to find the right poses to put in your composition, and finally give an overall view of the use of human figures in compositions. Let's get started. Here's an overview of the three techniques that we talked about in class of how to draw the human figure. The first I'm calling the vase technique because it goes along with your textbook, how we learned how to draw items like a vase or a lamp in 3 dimensions. So you create a central axis, and then you mark on that axis the individual heights of elements on your human figure. You might also mark important widths such as shoulders or hips, and then you can fill out the body from there. It's kind of a framework that you hang your body on. The next technique that we talked about was the skeleton technique, and I've got skeleton in quotes here because are we actually drawing ribs and skull and collarbones and pelvis? Not really. We're being a little bit more abstract than that. But you start with your 8 divisions of your human figure, and then you will build a abstract skeleton showing the body in motion in the pose that you want. Then you can fill that in to create your whole human figure. The last technique that we discussed, and might be even the most useful one, is called the box technique. In this class, we seem to bring everything back to the box. So here's how to use a box to create your human figure. And you see here that we build the correct size and shape box to fit within our perspective view. Okay. And then you can use the axis technique. You can use that vase technique to help create the right divisions in the box. And then you fill out your human figure. You can and should combine these 3 techniques to get your human figure in the right proportion and the right location in your drawings. Moving on, let's talk about the different poses that your human figure could have in your drawing. It's recommended that you base your rendering of a human figure on a real image. Use photographs, or your text says reference books, but we live in the internet age, and so there are many different websites of poses that you can use. Let's take a look at some of them chosen by you in our Padlet site. Okay, here we are in our Padlet site, which I've called Human Figures Reference Poses, and the link to this is in your Canvas module. And here are some of the websites that you students have chosen to share with us. Let's take a look at the one that I shared first. It's called Dimensions Guide. And here we are. It's got a section on humans. And scrolling down, there are just a number of different poses. They're all kind of in a stripped down outline abstract form, which you of course could then render in any way you liked. So let's click on sitting. And here we see many poses of people sitting that might be useful for your rendering. Coming back to our Padlet, let's try this link, Human Anatomy Fundamentals. And this website gives us, it says basic body proportions. And take a look at the evolution of this pose here, they're using that skeleton technique that we talked about before. And this website walks you through step by step how to get that skeleton technique. Coming back to the Padlet, let's take a look at this link right here. This website appears to be named Pose Maniacs, and looks like we have a number of different, in this case, action poses of humans in motion, which may or may not be relevant. But in this is really interesting because you get to see the muscles of this person as they are moving. As you go through this website, there are many, many pages right here of different poses, and some of them are seated poses. All right, I've come back to the Padlet. The other images here are single images and not websites, so let's take a look. We've got this view of some poses in motion. Here are some standing poses. Here are a number of outlines of standing and walking poses. Here's some photographs of seated poses. And the last one here are some seated and some standing poses. Our next topic here is creating compositions that use the human figure. If you use human figures in the composition, it adds interest, focus, scale, that's important, and motion or dynamics to your composition. It's important here in the interior design world to not make the human figure your focal point. Your interest should be in the beautiful space that you are designing. And therefore, just like when we were talking about putting artwork on the walls, you want to give an impression or a suggestion of the figure rather than being totally detailed and focused, especially on the face. Rendering styles vary, and they vary wildly, as we saw in all your Padlet images there. And it's important that the human figures in your rendering should harmonize in general with the style of the rest of the picture and the level of detail with the rest of the picture. Let's take a look at some examples. So here's the Padlet that you students have created. It's called Human Figures in Interior Design Renderings. And again, this one is located in your Canvas module. And what we've done is find some examples so we can take a look at some different renderings. Let's take a look at the one that I've posted first. And in this view, you can see looks like I've titled it, Interior Retail Concourse. We've got some seated figures and some walking figures. Take a look. The figures activate the space. They make it dynamic. They are in the same kind of outline, mid-level detail rendering style as the rest of the space, and they fit in the perspective view proportionally. Moving on to this next view, we see kind of a partially colored, partially black and white view of a exhibition space. And we've got a couple different types of people rendered in here. First of all, we've got kind of an outline view. You can see the edges of the people, but they are faded. You can almost see what's happening behind them. And interestingly, kind of in the far right over here, we've got a little bit different kind of human rendering where they are more photorealistic but grayed out. All right, so here's one option. Moving on to our next example of using human figures in composition, we have this piece here. The composition itself is very abstract. I'm not sure what this interior space is. It might be an office space, but it is not a perspective view of one space. It's more abstract than that. But you can see it's got a lot of human figures. They are adding interest, they are adding scale, they are adding the feeling of motion to this space. And the rendering style is very, very simple to match the very simple rendering style of the spaces. They are simply a silhouette in a dark gray color. Our next example uses a more photorealistic rendering style to match the rendering style of the composition. So we have, well, it's almost an interior design. It's kind of an interior design rendering of a patio. And it's got some very realistic renderings of plants and of furniture, and the people then match that style. Okay, there are a number of different poses. They are exhibiting and demonstrating how this space might be used. Our next example has a much more realistic style, right? And again, to match the style of the interior space. We have a lot of people in this example because it is a public space, and they wanted to show how active this space could be and while it was being used. Notice these people are scaled proportionally to fit in the perspective of the view. Also, they have a little bit of a shadow or a reflection here. Must be a very shiny floor surface. In this next view, we have a much more rough and abstract or sketchy rendering style. Again, I'm keep harping on this, but it matches the style of the rendering. And so we have people walking, people in motion, again, because it's a public space, a public walking area. All right, this view right here has people exhibiting the use of this space. It looks like a retail space, and so they are demonstrating how they can display these clothing. And we've got some details of the clothing, but take a look at the faces. They are very, very abstract. The focus of the rendering is not on these faces. For this last view, we've got a very ornate, very detailed rendering of a very detailed interior space. And you can see that it's the composition uses a human figure to accent this beautiful rendering. It's not the focus of this rendering, but it does give scale and motion to this beautiful space. Notice how the figures are proportional to the perspective rendering. And it shows how beautifully large this space is by putting these small figures in. And they are in motion, showing how this space might be used. Their rendering style fits the rendering of the rest of the drawing. And I ended with this picture because I really wanted to show how they didn't have to be that detailed. These figures, they have clothing, they have hair, but I'm not even sure they have hands. But they really accent and complement the rendering. This would be a much different view of the space if those people were left out. In conclusion, you're going to use a human figure in your interior design composition. It's going to provide focus, interest, and a sense of scale to your composition. It's not going to be the focus, however, because we want to see your beautiful design of your room. You can use many different rendering styles. Choose one that matches the rendering style that you're using for your room. And I'm very excited to see how you're going to add this human figure to your composition. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.